7 years after my best friend of 20 years stood in my mother's kitchen and told me she didn't owe me an explanation for the $14,000 that disappeared from my wedding fund, she called my office and asked me to help her manage someone else's. She didn't call it that. She called it getting a professional opinion. She said it like we'd never stop talking, like the space between us was just a busy season and not 7 years of silence. I sat at my desk with her name lighting up my phone for the first time since 2019, and before I even answered it, I already knew two things. I knew exactly why she was calling, and I knew exactly what I was going to do about it. Welcome back to Dark Revenge, where we tell the stories nobody puts on their Christmas card. Stolen inheritances, wedding day sabotage, best friends who turn out to be the villain the whole time. If you're the kind of person who keeps a folder for a reason, you're going to want to hear this one to the end. Drop a comment telling me who you'd have called first, and hit subscribe because we post a new one every week, and trust me, this isn't the last time a quiet person wins. My name is Leah Foster. I'm 34, and I run a small forensic accounting firm out of a converted duplex on Marymount Avenue in Asheville, North Carolina. Most days that means reading spreadsheets nobody wants to admit they need read. Divorce settlements, small business embezzlement, insurance fraud, the occasional estate where somebody's uncle borrowed from the trust and never wrote it down. People assume that kind of job makes you cold. It doesn't. It makes you patient. You learn that almost nobody gets caught because they're clever. They get caught because eventually, somewhere, there's a number that doesn't add up. And numbers, unlike people, don't know how to apologize their way out of a mistake. I wasn't always this calm about money. I used to be the kind of person who handed someone my debit card and said, "Just get it, I trust you." That sentence cost me more than any client ever has. Before I tell you about the wedding, I need to tell you about Bree, because you can't understand what she took from me without understanding what I'd already given her. Bree Callahan and I met in the 4th grade at Claxton Elementary, assigned seats alphabetically, Callahan next to Foster. Her mom worked doubles at a diner off Patton Avenue, and her dad wasn't really in the picture, and by the time we were 12, Bree was at my house more nights than her own. My mother kept a toothbrush for her in the bathroom cabinet. She came on our family vacations to Myrtle Beach every August, and nobody ever made her feel like a guest. When Bree needed a dress for 8th grade formal, my mom took us both to Belk and bought two, no discussion. When Bree's car got repossessed her sophomore year of college, I co-signed a loan for a used Corolla with my own name on it because hers wasn't good enough yet. I didn't do any of this because I was a saint. I did it because that's what you do for the person who's basically your sister. At least, that's what I believed for 20 years. Here's the thing about being the generous one in a friendship. You never notice the exact moment it stops being mutual because generosity doesn't ask for a receipt. I never once thought about what I'd given Bree over 2 decades in terms of dollars, until a forensic accountant had to. There's one memory from high school I keep coming back to, and I don't fully know why it stuck the way it did. Junior year, our school did a fundraiser trip to Washington, D.C., $410 a seat, and Bree's mom couldn't swing it. I remember Bree standing at her locker not saying she couldn't go, just saying she wasn't that into museums anyway, which was such an obvious lie that it hurt more than if she'd just told the truth. I didn't say anything to her. I went home and told my mom, and 2 days later my mother handed Bree an envelope in our kitchen and told her the school had a scholarship fund for a couple of seats that year. There was no scholarship fund. It was my mother's grocery budget for the month, stretched thin, so a 15-year-old wouldn't have to feel small in front of her friends. Bree cried in our driveway that day and told me I had the best family in the world. I believed that too. Right up until the wedding, when I started wondering whether being handed things without ever once being asked to pay them back teaches a person something you don't mean to teach them. I'm not saying that to excuse what came later. I've turned it over enough times in my head to know it isn't an excuse, and Bree would have to be the one to answer for whatever it explains. I bring it up because it matters for understanding the kind of trust that existed between us. It wasn't casual. It was load-bearing, which is exactly why, when it finally broke, it didn't just crack, it took the whole structure down with it. I met Nathan Cole at 28, working an audit for a marine supply company where he did engineering consulting. He was steady in the exact way I needed after years of being the reliable one for everybody else, the kind of man who read the fine print on things and still made you laugh doing it. We got engaged on the Blue Ridge Parkway at an overlook near Craggy Gardens on a Tuesday in October because he said Saturdays felt too much like a movie. I asked Bree to be my maid of honor before I'd even told my own sister. She cried on the phone. She said, "You're my family, Lee. You know that, right?" I did know that. That's the part that still gets me. Our wedding was set for the second Saturday in June, at a place called Cedar Hollow Farm out past Weaverville, a converted barn with string lights and a view of the mountains that made the deposit worth every penny. We set the budget at just under $23,000, most of it from my own savings, some from both sets of parents. To keep it simple, Nathan and I opened a single joint account just for wedding expenses, and because Bree had experience, she'd helped plan 2 other weddings in our friend group and always seemed to have vendors' numbers memorized, I added her as a signer. I was buried under an audit deadline that spring, working 60-hour weeks at my old firm before I struck out on my own, and Bree offered, unprompted, to handle the final vendor payments in May and early June, so I wouldn't have to think about it. "Let me do this for you," she said. "You've done everything for me for 20 years. I remember being grateful. I remember thinking I was lucky to have someone I trusted enough to hand that to. That's the part nobody tells you about trust. It isn't stupid. It's just blind by design. That's what makes it worth something in the first place." The wedding was supposed to start at 4 in the afternoon. By 11 that morning, the caterer called my mother, not me, my mother, because Bree had listed herself as the point of contact, and said the final balance of $3,800 had never cleared, and without it, they weren't loading the vans. By noon, the florist said the same thing about a smaller balance, and held our centerpieces in her cooler like collateral. By 1, the venue coordinator, a woman named Dana, who'd been nothing but kind through the whole process, pulled me aside in my dress with a face I will never forget and told me the final rental balance was also outstanding, and if it wasn't resolved in the next 2 hours, she couldn't guarantee we'd have use of the barn that evening. I want you to picture this. 140 guests were already driving in from 4 states. Nathan's parents had flown in from Ohio 2 days early. My father was already dressed in his suit in the parking lot, practicing the speech he'd give walking me down the aisle. And I was standing in a farmhouse bathroom in my wedding dress, on the phone with my own bank, discovering that the wedding fund, the one I had personally funded with over $16,000 of my own savings, had a balance of $612. I remember the exact texture of that bathroom, an old clawfoot tub someone had converted into a plant stand, a hand-lettered sign that said, "Here comes the bride," leaning crooked against the mirror, my sister's hands shaking worse than mine as she held my phone up, so I could read the bank app screen myself instead of taking anyone's word for it. $612. I read it 3 times, the way you reread a lab result hoping the second look changes the number. It never does. I called Bree first, before I called anyone else, because some instinct in me still hadn't caught up to what the numbers were telling me. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I texted her, "The accounts are empty. What happened to the vendor payments?" She didn't respond for 2 hours, and when she finally did, already an hour after we'd sent everyone home, all she wrote back was, "OMG, I'm so sorry, I'll figure it out. Don't panic. Focus on you today." She was 2 states away by then, at a lake house with Curtis, a detail I wouldn't learn until months later. We didn't get married that day. I want to say it straight like that because there's no soft way to say it. We sent people home. My father stood in the gravel lot and told 140 people, in the kindest voice I've ever heard him use, that there'd been some complications with the vendors, and that we hoped they'd understand. Nathan's mother cried, not out of anger at me, but because she could see I was somewhere past crying myself, standing very still, doing math in my head instead of falling apart, because falling apart wasn't going to get the florist paid. Dana, the venue coordinator, ended up being kinder to me that day than almost anyone. She didn't ask a single question. She just quietly rebooked us for a Wednesday in August at half the rental fee, an act of decency from a total stranger that I've never forgotten, and one I still think about every time a client tells me nobody was on their side when things fell apart. Somebody usually is. It just isn't always who you'd expect. We got married 2 months later at the Buncombe County Courthouse on a Wednesday morning with 11 people present. It was lovely in its own quiet way. But I want to be honest with you. Some small part of that day never fully healed, and it took me years to understand why. If you've ever handed someone the one thing you couldn't afford to lose and had it come back broken, tell me in the comments, because what came next is the part that still doesn't feel real to me even now. For the first few weeks after the courthouse wedding, I told myself a story that let me keep loving my best friend. I told myself the wedding fund got overdrawn because of a bank error or a scam or bad math on somebody's part, anything but the alternative. Bree cried with me on my couch the week after, said she felt sick about it, said she'd look into what happened with the accounts. I believed her because believing her was easier than the other thing. But I'm a numbers person, even back then, before it was my job. And numbers don't let you keep a comfortable story forever. In late June, going through old bank statements to figure out what to tell our insurance company about the wedding cancellation, I noticed something small. A series of transfers out of the wedding fund in the 2 weeks before the wedding, not to the caterer, not to the florist, not to the venue, routed instead through a personal Venmo account under the name Callahan. 6 transfers, $14,300 total. Almost exactly the gap between what I'd put into that account and what was left on the morning of my wedding. I didn't call her. I want you to understand why, because it matters for everything that happened after. I've spent my whole career learning that an accusation without proof is just a feeling with a microphone. If I was wrong, I'd have destroyed the one relationship I valued most over a coincidence. So instead, I did what I do now for a living, back before I even knew it was a career. I started keeping a folder. Over the next 4 months, quietly, without telling Bree, I requested full statements from our joint account going back a year. I got copies of the real vendor invoices, the caterer's actual final invoice, the florist's actual balance due, and matched them, line by line, against what had actually left the account. I saved screenshots. I wrote dates on sticky notes and photographed them next to bank printouts, the same habit I use with clients today, because a folder without dates is just paper. I told no one. Not my mother, not Nathan, not my sister. I was still hoping, somewhere underneath all that documentation, that I'd find an explanation that didn't end with Bree's name on it. I never found one. That fall, word must have gotten back to Bree that I'd been asking the florist a few quiet follow-up questions because she got to the story first, the way people who know they're guilty usually do. She started telling our mutual friends, carefully, sympathetically, like she hated to even say it, that the real reason the wedding fell apart was that Nathan had a gambling problem she'd only just found out about, and that she'd been trying to protect me from a truth I wasn't ready to hear. She told my own mother this over coffee. My mother, God love her, believed it for exactly 9 days, because Bree had never once given her a reason not to. That was the hardest month of my engagement, not the wedding day itself. Nathan sat across from me at our kitchen table, calm as ever, and said, I'll show you every account I have if it means we stop having this conversation. We ran a joint credit check together that week, something I'd have done for any client in 10 minutes, and somehow hadn't thought to do for my own fiancé, because I'd been raised to think suspicion was rude. There was nothing. No debt, no gambling apps, no missed payments, nothing but a man with a perfect credit score and a fiancé who'd almost let a lie cost her a marriage. That was the moment something in me went quiet and stayed that way. Not sat quiet, watching quiet. If you've ever had someone rewrite the truth faster than you could find it, stay with me, because the folder I kept for 4 months was about to get a lot thicker, and what was in it wasn't going to help Bree's story at all. By that winter, my folder had a name I'd never expected to write down. C. Dunlap Mobile Detailing LLC. Curtis Dunlap was Bree's boyfriend at the time, a guy trying to start a mobile car detailing business out of a converted box truck. Buried in the 6 transfers out of my wedding fund was one for $3,800, sent the same week Curtis registered that LLC with the state. Another $1,800 landed in Bree's own checking account the same week she paid off a credit card balance she'd been complaining about for over a year. I found a copy of a final invoice from my florist that Bree had sent my mother back in June, supposedly proving the balance had been paid, except the routing number on it didn't match the florist's real business account by 2 digits. Somebody had made that invoice up on a Sunday afternoon. I sat with all of it laid out on my dining table one night in January, the same clean, careful way I now lay out evidence for clients, and I understood something that took my breath away more than the theft itself. This wasn't panic. This wasn't a friend who made one desperate mistake under pressure. This was 6 separate, deliberate transfers, over 2 weeks, spaced out to avoid tripping any fraud alerts, followed by a forged document and a 4-month campaign to make the story about someone else's imaginary gambling debt. My best friend of 20 years hadn't lost her head. She'd made a plan. I never confronted her the way you'd expect. I didn't scream in her driveway. I filed a police report that February with the Asheville Financial Crimes Unit, quietly, with copies of everything, because by then I understood something about myself. I wasn't built for a fight in a kitchen. I was built for a fight with documentation. The detective I spoke with, a soft-spoken man named Ray Ortiz, told me honestly that with the dollar amount involved and Bree's name legitimately on the account as an authorized signer, it would likely sit as a civil matter rather than a criminal one unless something changed. I remember him saying, almost as an aside, "These things have a way of not staying isolated. If she does it again, this file will matter." I didn't understand yet how right he'd turn out to be. I just nodded, thanked him, and went home and kept the folder anyway. Not for revenge. Just because closing a file on an unfinished number has never once felt right to me. Bree and I didn't speak again after that January. No dramatic final phone call, no last argument. She moved to Charlotte that spring with Curtis, and our mutual friends slowly split into people who still believe her gambling story and people who'd quietly started asking me what really happened. I told almost none of them. Some truths you don't spend on gossip. You spend them somewhere they count. If you think that's where the story ends, old friend, old theft, old silence, I understand why. I thought so too for 7 years. Then my phone rang on a Tuesday in April, and Bree's name came up for the first time since 2019, and everything I'd kept in that folder turned out to matter more than I ever expected. By then I'd built something I was proud of. Foster Forensic Group opened its doors in 2022, and by this spring we had 4 employees, and a small write-up in the Asheville Business Journal for a fraud case we'd helped untangle at a local nonprofit. I assume that's how Bree found me again, or found the nerve to. Her voice on the phone was warm, easy, like no time had passed at all. She said she'd heard I was doing amazing things and wondered if she could pick my brain, as a friend, about something unrelated to us. She was maid of honor again, she said, for a young woman named Katie Lindgren she'd met through Curtis's new detailing shop in Charlotte. Katie was getting married in the fall, and Bree wanted advice, professional advice, she called it, on how to handle a joint wedding account without the bride's father hovering over every transfer. I sat very still at my desk while she said that sentence because it was the exact shape of a sentence I'd once trusted with $14,300. I told her I'd think about it and get back to her, and I hung up, and I did the thing I do for a living. I looked her up. It took less than an hour. Curtis Dunlap's detailing business, now with 3 locations, had a public review page, and on it, tagged in a customer appreciation post from March, was a photo of Bree standing next to a young bride-to-be, both of them smiling, captioned, "So honored to be maid of honor for this one." Katie Lindgren's own social media, set to public, showed an engagement announcement, a save the date for October, and a comment thread where her father, a man named Walter Lindgren, a retired contractor, had written, half joking, "As long as nobody touches Katie's wedding fund but us, I'm happy," under a post about opening a joint account for the vendors. I didn't call Katie. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been so easy to, and it would have been the wrong move for reasons I understood better than most people would. I had no standing to walk into a stranger's engagement and accuse her maid of honor of a crime based on a 7-year-old file and a bad feeling, no matter how certain I was. That's not evidence. That's just history wearing a new face. So I did the only thing I actually had the right to do. I called Detective Ortiz. He remembered the case immediately, which told me something on its own. Some files, apparently, don't fully close even when they go quiet. I told him about the phone call, about Curtis's business, about the Lindgren family's own joint account. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something I've thought about since. One theft is an allegation. A pattern is a case. He asked if I still had my folder. I told him I'd never once thrown it away. 2 weeks later, I learned that Walter Lindgren had, entirely on his own and with no idea I existed, hired an accountant of his own. Not me, a colleague across town, after noticing small transfers out of his daughter's wedding account that didn't match any real vendor he recognized. That accountant, doing exactly what I would have done, ran the receiving account and found it traced back to the same Dunlap detailing business. Walter went to the police the same week Detective Ortiz was reopening my old file. 2 families, 2 folders, 1 name in the middle of both. If you've ever wondered whether keeping receipts for years actually matters, this is the part of the story where it finally paid off, because what happened next wasn't loud, and it wasn't cruel, and it was still the most complete kind of justice I've ever seen. There was no courtroom showdown, no scene in a parking lot, nothing you'd film for drama. Detective Ortiz combined both files under a pattern of conduct theory, financial exploitation across 2 separate incidents, 7 years apart, with documentation clean enough on both ends that the district attorney's office moved quickly. Bree was charged that summer. Facing 2 well-documented cases instead of 1 shaky one, her attorney negotiated a plea rather than risk trial, a felony fraud conviction, a suspended sentence contingent on full restitution to both families, and 5 years of financial monitoring as part of her probation. Curtis, it turned out, genuinely hadn't known where all the early money for his business had come from. He cooperated fully once he understood, and he and Bree separated before the case was even resolved. I got a portion of my original $14,300 back through restitution. Not all of it. Restitution rarely means all of it, but enough that the number in my old folder finally closed. Katie Lindgren's wedding happened that October exactly as planned, fully paid, because her father's caution and a stranger's decade-old habit of keeping receipts happened to meet at the right moment. I still haven't met Katie in person. I don't need to. Some kindnesses work better as a favor you never have to collect on. Bree wrote me 1 letter, about a month after the plea deal, the closest thing to an apology I ever got. She said she was sorry, that she'd never meant for it to become this, that she panicked 22 years old and in debt, and watching her best friend's life go somewhere hers never had. I believe that part might even be true. But I've learned something in this job that applies just as well to friendship as it does to fraud. The size of someone's regret has nothing to do with the size of what they took. I wrote her back exactly 1 sentence. I hope you stop needing other people's money to feel like you belong somewhere. I never mailed a 2nd letter, and she never wrote a 3rd. Nathan and I renewed our vows on our 5th anniversary, small and quiet, out at Cedar Hollow Farm, the same barn, the same view of the mountains, this time fully paid for by 2 people who like knowing exactly where their money goes. My mother cried at that one too, but for entirely different reasons than the first time. I keep my grandmother's old recipe box on my desk at the firm now, repurposed to hold nothing but blank index cards, because every so often a client needs to be reminded, gently, that the smallest habit, writing a date on a piece of paper, is sometimes the only thing standing between them and a story someone else gets to write about their life. I learned that the hard way, in a farmhouse bathroom in a wedding dress, and I've spent every year since making sure nobody has to learn it quite that hard again. If there's one thing I'd want you to carry out of the story, it's this. Betrayal doesn't usually announce itself. It shows up looking like help. It offers to handle the account, so you don't have to think about it. The truth doesn't need you to be loud to survive. It just needs you to write things down and wait, however long it takes, for the moment someone hands you the exact same lie twice. That's our story for today. If it kept you watching, you know what to do. Like it. Drop a comment telling me if you'd have called Katie directly, or done what Leah did, and hit subscribe, because on Dark Revenge, we've got a lot more quiet people about to stop being quiet. See you in the next one.